Good morning, everyone. Hi, hello. My name is EJ, and I am back again with another narrated art time-lapse video for us to take a look at and hopefully learn a thing or two from. So yeah, today we're going to be taking a look at my entry from last month's KritaArtists.org monthly challenge, and yeah, it's hoverbikes. It's one of my favorite subjects that I have a tendency to draw every now and then, which I actually haven't drawn a hoverbike in 2 years. I kind of miss drawing one, so it was an absolute blast getting the chance to draw a hoverbike again. But real quick, before I dive too much into the art process, I wanted to gloss over the prompt and whatnot. So the very first time I read the prompt for the challenge, I was at work, so I was reading through the prompt. And basically, my key takeaway from that prompt, or from that first read, my key takeaway was that we were supposed to draw race vehicles, right? And so that was my understanding of the prompt. So I started my sketch a few days later. This particular process that we're taking a look at, I did this maybe a few days after I read that prompt, right? And then maybe after an hour and a half to 2 hours into the work, I took a break, and then I decided to visit the forum again and read through the prompt. And that's when I realized there was actually a requirement that I missed, which was the wheels. We were supposed to draw a wheeled vehicle. That was like the idea behind the prompt. So clearly I don't have wheels on my vehicle. Mine is a hoverbike. So there was conversation about it, whether this was the right if this was the right entry or not, or if this was a correct entry. And it was basically talked about as being categorized as a future vehicle of some sort. So I put it up for a vote, not really expecting too much on whether it was gonna win or not. So I'm really actually kind of surprised that it won, especially since it doesn't really stick to the guidelines of the prompt. But yeah, I do appreciate everyone's vote. I am thankful for you guys, and I'm thankful for your understanding of my misunderstanding of the initial prompt. So really do sorry about that. So yeah, but anyways, let's talk about the process, which is part of the reason why I'm doing a narration in this particular video, right? So before I dive too deep into the unique processes that I did for this particular illustration, right? Because I did a few things different in this illustration than I normally do. Let's talk about my normal process. So my normal process is typically I would do a quick sketch, very messy, very messy sketch. After that quick sketch, I would do a nice clean line sketch. Then I would do my coloring phase. I did it slightly reverse in this one. I did the quick sketch first, and I did the coloring phase, and then I went back with my clean line sketch, which is what we're taking a look at in this process. Now let me backtrack real quick and talk about my coloring process. My coloring process is pretty unique. I haven't really seen anyone do it this way. I basically have a starting palette of like about 8 colors, right? And it's basically thematically arranged. I got all these palettes from the Color Palette Cinema Instagram. Do check out their Instagram. They have great palettes that they derive from cinema, basically. So I have about 30 of those that I got from there, plus 4 extra from another artist, right? So practically all my pieces start out from this 34 palettes, right? And basically when I do a piece, I just stick to one palette as much as I can, so that the colors are thematically cohesive with each other. I do try to add in local color. For example, if I pick like a pink theme, right? A pink theme palette. And it doesn't really have any blue sky on it. Obviously, I would still have to use blue in order to denote blue sky. So obviously, I would still throw in local color. But for the most part, a lot of my pieces stick to this palette just to simplify my coloring process. Now, I pick a brush, David Revoy's random mech brush. I set that to a hue to vary the hue a little bit. I would pick colors from whatever palette I decided to choose for that particular illustration, quickly lay them down on the canvas, right? And it looks really messy. I did this at the very beginning, probably like in the first minute or two of this video. It looks really messy. As soon as I lay down those colors, what I do is I start concentrating on values. Very important, right? I go back with a brush set on multiply, and I kind of denote where the values are, how dark things are, how light things are. It's very important. That's actually a lot more important than color harmony. If your values are good in your illustration, no matter what kind of colors you throw on there, it's going to succeed if your values are good. So values rank a little bit higher in importance than colors are. Color harmony and color theory, those are all great theories to keep in mind when you're doing your illustration, but hands down, value is king. So anyways, after I do the values, what I do is all the layers that I've created, right? I merge them all into one. I smudge them all just so that I could get this base layer. And that was that base. The base layer was what I drew my clean line sketch on top of, right? That was my initial base layer. And then after I get my base layer, I would basically just start detailing. My detailing is pretty much a rinse repeat process. I basically delineate my edges, which means I make my edges sharper. I accentuate the shadows, and I add highlights. So I go repeat this process in each and every single part of the image, basically. So I would basically just zoom in and then just slowly start working on the piece, detailing the piece. So the idea is that I basically work on one layer, right? So as soon as I start my detailing process, it's all pretty much just working on one layer. Right now, I did the whole smudging thing twice in this particular one. So I did it first with the messy sketch. Then I did the clean line sketch, and then I merged them all again to start smudging them just to get that base layer, which is what we're taking a look at right now. And then after I've done all my smudging, then I slowly start detailing my piece. So I sometimes bring up the clean line sketch again just so that I could have a guide for detailing, which is what I'm doing right now. But as you can see, if you take a look at the lower right section, I only have that one layer that I'm working at. This is pretty unique also because I separated the foreground from the background. So I'm just working on the foreground. And so yeah, this is basically how I detail my piece. Now, the reason why I wanted to do narration for this video is because of the unique thing that I did from this particular illustration, which is I added extra layers for special effects, which I wanted to go over. So there's a few pretty unique situation with this particular illustration that I typically don't have to worry over. Oh, and this is really cool. I totally had forgotten about this. The optional challenge where we're supposed to do like some form of sponsorship and whatnot on the bikes, I have that on a separate layer. You see me create a layer called sponsors. I think that was on hard light mode or something. I'd forgotten that I've separated that instead of painting that on the actual piece itself. So that was pretty cool to see. So yeah, that's another cool thing. Sometimes I would either draw like a decal. I'm sorry, I'm mispronouncing that. Like whatever decal there is on a vehicle, I typically will hand paint it directly on the vehicle itself, or I'll separate it on a separate layer depending on the given situation. In this particular situation, I separated it, so that's an extra layer. Again, let's go back over to the special effects that I mentioned that I wanted to use on this piece. So one of the unique things about this piece is the lighting situation. The lighting situation is backlit, and if you've seen any of the videos that I have in the past, there's a few backlit illustrations that I've done narration over, and in any of those narrations I always talk about the complications that come with backlit scenes. Backlit scenes are just immensely hard with lighting. I forgot to turn off notifications when I was doing this recording. I'm sorry, I'm being notified by my phone, and I am being super distracted. So let me put that on silent so I won't get distracted once again. But yeah, backlit scenes are very hard because typically everything is kind of dark. So trying to balance the whole like darkness versus lightness and like preserving the details, that's already hard. This whole scene is backlit. The sun is behind the bikes and whatnot. So if you look at the bikes, a lot of their values are in the mid to slash darker range, just because everything else is brighter around them. So that's a one unique situation that I had to contend with. The sun being directly behind that bike in the back, that's gonna create a glow, right? So there's two glows that I rendered from GIMP that I brought over to this illustration that I use. One was like a starburst effect. You saw that one is the starburst effect plus the lens flare effect, or like the lens, not the lens flare. The lens flare is what I'm working on right now, which is okay, now I'm like losing my terms. If the lens flare is the little circular things in the lower right, I think that is actually the lens flare. I think there's a different term for this one that I'm working on, which I'm not quite sure what the name of it is. But the lens flare is the one in the lower right. It's very, very subtle. It's basically like this aberration that happens on the camera lens from looking directly at a light source, right? A lot of photos will have this embedded on them. It's just one of the things that happens with lenses, unfortunately. So, but yeah, basically to summarize what I'm really trying to get at, because I'm having a long-winded thought about this, I basically employed a bunch of lighting effects that was needed because of the backlit scenario. So one of them was the lens flare, one of them was the starburst effect, and then of course the light lens flare effect as well. I guess let's just call it light lens flare on the motorbike lights. I added them all as special effects, which of course added enhanced realism. All of those had to be on separate layers. I can't really hand paint them on the base layer because those are kind of difficult to paint, right? And those are very, very hard to get right if you were hand painting it. So it was best that I separate them on their own layers, set them all on a blending mode that would enhance their look, which is either on color dodge, which is what I mainly use, or screen, depending on the situation, right? So I have those lighting effects, which makes everything cool. And then the other thing that I had to do just to enhance the realism some more was motion blur, right? These bikes are supposed to be speeding, supposed to be going through fast, right? And, in a given situation, if the camera is taking a look at them and taking a photo of them, right, they typically won't have as much motion blur, even if they're going really fast, if the camera is set up right. Now, in order for the camera to capture movement, and maybe I'm going over this explanation too much. To briefly explain the aperture, right? The aperture basically have to open up really wide in order for the camera to see the subject to compensate for the backlit scenario. When you open up the aperture, that's when more motion blur happens, basically. So I knew that since this scene is backlit, there's going to be more motion blur effect versus like any other regular sport photograph, for example, right? Because I know that if a camera was taking a photo of this, right, the aperture would have to open up more. So that was another effect that I basically have to employ. So basically what I did was, after I've done all my sketching and after I've done all my rendering, I basically take a copy of everything I've rendered, right? I separated the back bike versus the front bike because they're all gonna have different motions, right? The one in the lower left is basically moving forward, while the other one is, well, the one on the right is kind of like more jumping up, right? I mean, that's kind of like what I had in my head when I illustrated it. So both of those bikes are going to have different motions. So they're going to have different motion blurs, basically. So I had to copy those and then set a motion blur effect in order to enhance the realism. This is what I'm working on right now. Kind of just messing around with the motion blur. So yeah. Those are pretty much the unique things that I did on this particular illustration that I typically don't do in my other illustration. I did this one other time, maybe last year. Was it last year? I'm trying to remember. Hang on real quick. I'm going to take a look through my video selection and figure out when the last time we did the reflection contest. If I'm not wrong, I know I posted that video, the reflection video, sometime this year, which meant that that contest was last year. So let me look through my computer real quick and figure out when we did it. Yeah, we did it sometime in spring last year was when we did the reflection competition at Krita artists. That one was also unique because I had to separate all the layers, all the reflection, right? All the reflection properties in the window and whatnot. I had to basically separate those from the main illustration. Because typically when I work, I do just one layer. Just to simplify the whole process, I would just color pick from that one layer and just paint on that layer. If I make mistakes, big woohoo, I cover it up just like a traditional artist would. So yeah, I know there's this huge debate about whether you work destructively or non-destructively in the digital industry. Basically, working non-destructively would mean keeping all your layers intact as much as you can, and separating everything all in its own layers. And then you have artists like me, which is pretty much we're all hard-coded to paint like we would paint on an acrylic canvas or an oil canvas. So we pretty much deal with the whole piece like in one layer, which is basically what I'm doing. Like I literally did 80% of all my artwork, all my detailing in that one layer called bikes in the lower right section. So yeah, but it's unique though, because I still had to do all the lighting effects, and I knew that I had to separate them because painting those by hand would be difficult, right? So I want a little bit more control. And that's where the whole, working on separate layers, working non-destructively really does help. Separating them in layers, you can control the effect of the light, the effect of the motion blur and all that great stuff. So yeah, it's something to think about when you're going through your digital journey and whatnot. So, but anyways, this piece is almost done. I'm really happy with this piece. I really like the effects that I added on it. I don't do a whole lot of effects on my pieces. just because, you know, I don't know, I just don't, I guess. Not lighting effects like this particular one anyways. This one really does have some unique lighting effects, and so yeah, but it was fun. It was fun doing all of this. I really had fun. I'm doing the motion blur on that back bike now, trying to get the motion blur on that right, and then turning on the motion blur on the one on that right, and then balancing everything out, and there it is. The illustration is done. Thank you guys for watching this with me. I hope you guys learned a thing or two from it. I will see you guys in the next video. Like and subscribe. Good night.